Donald Trump, it appears, recognizes that his plan is in trouble. And so he made a statement the other day that said that basically it's all speculation until he meets with Vladimir Putin. And it's going to be one of the shortest meetings ever, because Putin, there's not going to be any, Trump staring him in the eyes and giving him the Joe Biden, you're evil thing, all that nonsense. It's going to be Trump saying, hey, what about, and Putin will say, no. What about, no. What about, no. And Putin just said, what part of we won the war don't you understand? And if you want to be part of the losing side, you have a chance in history right now to get yourself out of this mess. But if you want to double down on stupid, pour good money after bad, feel free, because we're winning and we're not going to lose. We're willing to put everything into this, What are you willing to put in? And Trump doesn't have an answer to that, because Trump's not ready to put everything into it. So I think eventually Trump will have to make some hard decisions that will run against the grain of his Russophobic advisors. But it's either that or just continue this failed policy. Nothing is going to stop Russia from winning this war. There's not enough money. There's not enough military equipment. NATO doesn't have the ability to meaningfully intervene. So nothing's going to stop Russia from winning this war. And that's the hard truth that Donald Trump's going to have to confront.
Trump's grand plan on the verge of collapse. His bold claims shattered by a brutal reality. The war in Ukraine isn't a negotiation. It's a verdict. And according to Putin, Russia has already won. The message is clear. Bow out now or be dragged into a losing battle. Scott Ritter paints a grim picture, one where Trump's tough guy diplomacy is rendered useless against an unyielding Kremlin. He suggests that Russia's victory is inevitable, and Trump is left with a painful choice: defy his own advisors and acknowledge the so-called reality of Russian dominance, or double down on a failing Western strategy. In this version of events, NATO is powerless, Ukraine is doomed, and the U.S. must either accept defeat or throw more resources into an unwinnable war. But is this truly the case? Let's break it down. Energy dependencies and the shifting balance of power, it's time to shift our focus to a significant development unfolding on the world stage. The diplomatic landscape is undergoing a seismic shift as the United States and Russia engage in historic negotiations in Saudi Arabia. These talks mark the most direct and constructive engagement between the two nations in years, tackling crucial issues such as the war in Ukraine, economic sanctions, and potential pathways toward de-escalation. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Russian forces have made notable gains in Ukraine, particularly in the town of Ulakli, where a major military operation has resulted in the clearing of Ukrainian forces. Let's break down these crucial developments and their potential global implications. February 18, 2025, has proven to be a landmark day in both diplomacy and military developments. Two key events unfolded simultaneously. Russia and the U.S. concluded a critical round of negotiations in Saudi Arabia, signaling the first major diplomatic thaw since the onset of the war, and Russian forces made decisive territorial gains in Ukraine, successfully securing Ulakli and further tightening their grip on the battlefield. The most critical geopolitical event of the day was the high-profile negotiations between Russian and American delegations held in Saudi Arabia. These talks were not just another diplomatic formality, but a potential turning point in the conflict, marking one of the rare instances where both nations openly acknowledged a willingness to discuss key issues. The Russian delegation was led by Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, while senior U.S. officials participated in what was described as serious discussions on all issues. Dmitriev's statement emphasized that economic progress was a primary focus, and that negotiations between Russia and the U.S. could see significant breakthroughs in the next 2 to 3 months. One of the most striking declarations came from Marco Rubio, who acknowledged that all sides must make concessions to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. This statement indicated that the U.S. is considering adjustments to its previously rigid stance on economic sanctions. Reports emerged that Coca-Cola is planning to return to Russia, signaling the first concrete sign that Western sanctions might be loosened in the near future. While the Biden administration had previously dismissed negotiations with Moscow, there is now a shift in tone. For the first time in years, Washington appears willing to listen to Russia's concerns, with talks covering not just Ukraine but also broader trade, economic cooperation, and even joint Arctic projects. Putin and Trump? The elephant in the room. A major topic of discussion was whether a direct meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump would take place. While Russian presidential aide Ushakov confirmed that this possibility was discussed, he also clarified that a meeting is unlikely to happen in the immediate future. However, both sides acknowledge that ongoing communication is necessary, a notable contrast to previous years of complete diplomatic deadlock. While Russia and the U.S. were engaged in negotiations, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Turkey, meeting with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. This visit was significant because Ukraine has been pushing for Turkey, rather than Saudi Arabia, to be the main mediator in peace talks. However, the reality is that neither Russia nor the U.S. seems willing to let the European Union or Turkey dictate the terms of negotiation at this stage. Given the U.S. and Russia's strategic priorities, Ukraine's leverage in these discussions appears to be shrinking. While diplomatic discussions unfolded in Saudi Arabia, Russian forces on the ground achieved a significant breakthrough by capturing Ulakli, a crucial stronghold that had been fiercely contested for weeks. The Russian military captured the western part of the town, fully expelling Ukrainian forces. Strategic river crossings along the Vysuyali were secured, cutting off a vital Ukrainian supply route. The Ukrainian army suffered heavy losses and an increasing number of troops surrendered to Russian forces. A key overpass between Kamar and Fedorovka was destroyed by Russian missile or aerial bombardment. This bridge was a critical logistic artery that previously allowed Ukrainian forces to resupply and reinforce their defensive lines. With it gone, Russia has effectively neutralized Ukrainian counterattack capabilities in the region. Following their success in Ulakli, Russian forces are intensifying their offensive toward Konstantinovka, one of Ukraine's key defensive strongholds in the region. Ukrainian troops in Konstantinovka are now nearly encircled, with their main supply routes coming under increasing pressure from Russian attacks. If Ukraine fails to regain control of the N-15 road, a large contingent of their forces could be encircled and forced to surrender. Russian troops launched an offensive in the northern part of Andriivka, advancing along tree lines to outflank Ukrainian defensive positions. Russian forces are attempting to encircle Ukrainian units west of the settlement, potentially cutting off yet another key Ukrainian defensive position. The simultaneous diplomatic engagement and battlefield success highlight a pivotal moment in the war. The fact that both sides agreed to respect each other's interests suggests that Washington and Moscow are looking for common ground, something unimaginable just a few months ago. If Western sanctions start to ease, Russia could regain access to critical financial and industrial resources, strengthening its position. Zelensky's attempt to make Turkey the center of negotiations was largely overshadowed by the direct engagement between Russia and the U.S. in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine faces growing battlefield losses, and without decisive Western military aid, it is at risk of losing key territories. The clearing of Ulakli and surrounding areas allows Russia to concentrate its forces for further offensives. The destruction of Ukrainian supply lines is a major setback for Kyiv, making it harder to reinforce frontline troops. If Ukraine loses Konstantinovka, it would be one of its biggest battlefield defeats in months. As the world watches, we are witnessing the most significant shift in the war since its onset. Russia and the U.S. are engaging in historic negotiations, signaling that diplomacy, rather than military confrontation, could eventually shape the outcome of this conflict. However, on the battlefield, Russia is pressing its advantage, seizing Ulakli and setting the stage for further advances. What happens next depends on how these negotiations evolve and whether Ukraine can hold its defensive lines. Will the war drag on, or are we seeing the early steps toward a geopolitical realignment? The next few weeks will be crucial in determining the answer. The events of February 18, 2025 mark a turning point in both diplomacy and military developments. On one hand, the historic negotiations between the U.S. and Russia in Saudi Arabia signal the first serious diplomatic engagement between the two nations in years. Talks of potential economic cooperation, trade adjustments, and even possible sanction relief indicate that Washington and Moscow are exploring a new dynamic, one that could reshape the global order. If these discussions gain traction, the world may see a fundamental shift in U.S.-Russia relations, with ripple effects extending far beyond Ukraine. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Russia's military campaign is making notable progress. The capture of Ulakli and the severing of Ukrainian supply lines mark significant gains for Russian forces, pushing Ukrainian troops into an increasingly precarious position. With the offensive toward Konstantinovka underway, Ukraine faces the possibility of losing another critical stronghold, which could have devastating consequences for its defensive strategy. So, what does all of this mean? Are we witnessing the beginning of a broader diplomatic realignment that could lead to peace? Or is this just a strategic maneuver by both sides while the war rages on? The answers remain uncertain, but one thing is clear. The global balance of power is shifting before our eyes. What do you think? Will these negotiations bring an end to the war, or will Russia use them as a smokescreen while continuing its military campaign? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay ahead of the latest developments, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.